Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. We're actually getting all that snow we talked about before is melting, so I'm feeling
Is it
pretty
gone?
good.
It's still not gone, though.
Oh, no, it's not gone. Not even close to gone.
Still there.
But the piles are smaller.
That is some resilient snow you got in Chicago, John.
Well, it's not. When I say it's been warmer, it's been a little warmer. Not like, lots of melting warmer. If that all melted at once, though, it'd probably be a flood. So it's probably best that it's taking a little while. Why don't we get started with what happened on MacStories this week? And we had a bunch of reviews and other things happen. And the first one I want to mention is Nudge It, which is a budgeting app that Alex reviewed this week. And, it's a great app, I think, because one, the design is really nice. It's clean, easy to read, kind of glanceable, and works really well for getting in and out of the app quickly. And I think that's one of the things to me that's most important with this kind of app because, tracking your expenses isn't always super fun. I mean, maybe some people, that's their hobby and they're into it, but it's not mine. And so it's best, just like any kind of habit tracking app, that it be easy to get in and out without too much trouble so it doesn't become too much of a pain to record those expenses. And Nudge It does that. It does a terrific job at that. It has 3 categories that's broken down into their recurring expenses, your spending money, and your savings. And it's a system that makes it very clear and easy to know exactly what's going on. And on top of that, it includes all sorts of insights. If you tag your expenses as you input them, you can do things like, maybe you have a tag for eating out, and you have another one for groceries, and you have another one for your utility bills. Whatever it happens to be, you can get insights on where your money is going based on those tags. And of course, there's also a transaction history, so you can kind of go back and look and see what those big expenses were in the last month or whatever time period you want and go from there. So great app, big update. It's on the iPad now, which is a big deal because that was, I think, one of the biggest knocks on the original version, but it's there as well. So take a look at it and read Alex's review because he's got a lot more detail on it. On Monday, I reviewed Genius Scan 6, which is an iOS scanning app. And I don't use scanning apps a lot, but I certainly have been using iOS ones more often because they've really gotten really good. And Genius Scan does a terrific job at page detection. If you've ever tried to scan something using your iPhone's camera and maybe put a white piece of paper down on a light piece of furniture, maybe it's a white table or something like that, or really light wood. Sometimes in the past, either the Notes app or other scanning apps would have a hard time figuring out where the edges were of the piece of paper. Genius Scan does a particularly good job of page detection, as well as OCR, especially if the document is really, really flat. Beyond that, it has a really nice system for replacing pages. So if it has the kind of auto scan feature you see in a lot of these apps where you point your camera at a page, it recognizes it, takes the scan, then you slide another piece of paper under the camera, it does it again, and you just do it with however many pieces of paper you have, get all the pages, and then you can look at them and review them. And if there's one you don't like, if it didn't come out right for some reason, you can go back and you can replace it. All you have to do is, instead of starting over, or deleting it and having that page be at the back end of the stack, you replace that page, it drops you back into the scan UI, you rescan that page, and it puts it right where it belongs, which is a really nice feature. Beyond that, there's also the document list, which is kind of the main view you enter when you first open the app. It's got a lot of nice features that make it quick to do things like preview the document by long pressing on it, or exporting it. And this app has a very long list of cloud services that it supports. So if you have, like a particular cloud service you need to upload things to for getting reimbursements from your job or whatever it happens to be, it's probably supported because there's a long list there. And the other review I did this week, I'm going to switch on over to Dark Mode Buddy, which is an app by Guy Rambo. And This is a Mac utility. It's a headless Mac utility. It doesn't sit up in your menu bar or anywhere else. What it does, though, is it tracks, when you open it, you get a small preferences window, and it tracks the ambient light in the room if you're using a laptop, of course. It's the same sensor that is used to do auto brightness on the screen of a Mac laptop. But what Dark Mode Buddy does is you set a threshold for the amount of light at which it switches from light mode to dark mode or back again. And then you also set a delay timer so that your Mac has to have crossed that threshold for a certain amount of time. And what that does is it prevents it from flickering back and forth quickly. Because when you open this preference pane, you'll see the actual light level fluctuating as you sit in a room. Maybe the sun goes behind a cloud and it drops by 5 lumens or whatever the measurement is. And so you wouldn't want that to, quickly flip back and forth between light and dark mode. But if you set it at something like 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes, whatever you decide makes sense, it won't do that. And once it gets to a particular darkness in the room, whether it's because it's becoming nighttime, or maybe you just happen to be in kind of a dim room, it switches on over to dark mode, which I think is a really neat feature that should be built into the system, because you can do this with the time of day. You can set it by time of day in Big Sur, but you can't do it based on the ambient light in the room. So hopefully maybe Guy gets Sherlocked on this at some point, but it's a pay your own, your whatever price you want project. So check it out, and I would suggest using it because I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's a very nice idea. I really like the approach. Also this week on MacStories, I shared an update to my Apple Frames shortcut that now supports the 2020 iPad Air. So the latest iPad Air model with a 10.9-inch display, it's now fully supported by Apple Frames, which is my shortcut that puts iOS, iPadOS, and watchOS screenshots inside physical device frames. These are based on official product image assets from Apple that have been optimized for shortcuts. And you can download the latest version of Apple Frames, run it on your iPad Air, and it will frame those screenshots in both portrait and landscape. And obviously, as before with Apple Frames, there's support for all kinds of devices. It can merge multiple images into a single one, and there's a series of actions at the end of the shortcut to preview the image or share with extensions or copy to the clipboard, preview in Quick Look, a bunch of really nice stuff. So go download it on MacStories as well as the MacStories Shortcuts Archive. You will find the latest version there. Earlier this week, Spotify announced that at some point in 2021, they will roll out Spotify Hi-Fi, a new high-resolution CD quality tier for the music streaming service. We don't have any other details yet. I mentioned this on Connected. Basically, all they said was CD quality music. So we can expect a lossless tier from Spotify. We don't have any details on pricing. We know nothing at this point.
Right.
Except that once Spotify does this, basically the only major player left out of the high resolution music streaming space will be Apple with Apple Music. Obviously, Spotify is entering a space that has a lot of competition between Tidal, with Tidal Masters, and Deezer, but also, and more importantly, Amazon Music HD, right? Amazon came in and undercut the competition with their aggressive pricing strategy for lossless music streaming. But Spotify is interesting because they have a whole ecosystem of Spotify Connect enabled devices from third-party speaker manufacturers that in theory could take advantage of this superior music quality of Spotify Hi-Fi. So we'll definitely keep an eye on this, and I'm definitely going to subscribe as soon as I can.
We'll see.
We'll see when it rolls out in the US, I guess, because I have a US account. And finally, I also had a linked post to an excellent article on 6 Colors by Jason Snell. I meant to link this a few weeks ago, and then it just, as with many things, unfortunately, in life, I fell behind on my to-do list. It's called The Mortality of Software. And Jason wrote this in response to the announcement that Call Recorder, which is a utility for Skype, will be discontinued. and it will no longer be supported on macOS, especially on M1 Macs. And Jason wrote this post in the broader context of, essentially, we need to keep in mind that all the apps that we use, the software that we rely upon, even if we relied upon a particular application for decades, that application is still made by people. And eventually, it's rough to say, but eventually those people will die, or they will retire, or something will happen to them, and they will stop working on the app. And those people, once they're no longer working on that product, what happens to you, the user? So the idea that change, we may not always like it, changing our workflows, changing the way that we work, that we get things done, but it's inevitable. And so keeping the mindset of change is always unexpected, but we need to account for it and we need to be prepared. It resonates with me because it's one of the things that we always discuss on our shows, and especially on App Stories. The idea of, I want to be prepared for change and I want to be open to change. And that's why I always want to try new things, because yes, I have some apps that I really enjoy using and that I would have a hard time if you told me, look, tomorrow morning, Federico, you got to stop using IA Writer, or you got to stop using shortcuts. And I would be, well, I'm panicking, right? Because now I depend on those apps. But I also know that eventually I will have to, because eventually they will stop working, hopefully decades from now when I will retire. But still, it's a very good post, so go check it out on 6 Colors.
Yeah, it is a really good story. We should also mention too that we had a short review of Overcast, because Overcast got an update this week, and there are 2 major things here. One is that the Apple Watch app has been completely rewritten. I have not had a chance to try this out yet, but based on Alex's review and the screenshots, it looks like a big improvement to what was the Overcast Apple Watch app already. And especially with the weather maybe getting warmer here soon, I'll be out going for jogs without my phone along, and the Overcast Apple Watch app could be perfect for that. The other thing is that there's a long list of shortcut actions that have been added to Overcast. I took a peek to see what was there, and boy, it looked like virtually every feature available in Overcast. So I'm excited to try that out and see what I can make from it. Federico, let's switch on over to the club. We published MacStories Weekly today, and we had a bunch of different things in there. It was an interesting blend of topics. Alex had a favorite, which was Broadcasts by Steve Troughton-Smith. And, that's a great iOS app for listening to internet radio stations, which I know you use quite a bit and I've used as well. And then I did an extension column where I talked about an automation that I created this week, which was an automation that allows me to hit a HomeKit button that ejects external drives that I use for Time Machine that are connected to my M1 MacBook Air. It took a lot of research, and I came up with several different ways to approach this problem. But in the end, a combination of home automations through shortcuts and HomeKit, along with a menu bar app I discovered on the Mac, and some Apple script all work together to come up with a solution that works quite well. And you've been experimenting, I guess, too, with RSS and read later services again.
Yeah, I wrote about a different setup that I'm testing for RSS and read later that involves a different RSS client than what I usually use, and that it involves a different take on saving links and opening them. Sort of like a more powerful take on Safari Reading List, but it's not Safari Reading List. So go check it out in MacStories Weekly. I know that it was a surprise for John, but it's a small thing that I wrote that I've been doing these past 10 days. It was fun. It was fun, and I don't know if I'll stick to it, but I want to see how it works. And also on App Stories this week, John, we did the flip side of episode 205 from last week. Last week we said, what should the Mac steal from the iPad? And this week we asked, well, what should the iPad steal from the Mac instead? So we covered, a bunch of things like external, doing backups on external drives, automation, file management. So all the things we like the iPad OS to borrow and remix and reimagine from Mac OS. So whether you're an iPad or a Mac user, go listen to that episode of App Stories because it's a fun one. It's a fun exercise in imagining how things could be in the future.
Yeah, definitely, especially since Apple's been doing a lot of that already. And so, we're just giving them some wish list items that they can work on over the summer. All right, Federico, this episode of Unwind and all of MacStories this week is brought to you by Menu Bar Stats. This is an incredible app that does advanced system monitoring right from your Mac's menu bar. It can track things like your battery, Bluetooth devices, the CPU, GPU, your storage, memory, network connections, and with the help of a helper app, it can also track the temperature and fan speed inside your Mac. It's highly customizable. You can look at everything from one long window that descends down from the menu bar app, or you can break them out into separate windows. There are also, you can set up notifications when certain triggers are met so that you know that something maybe needs to be dealt with on your Mac because maybe something's not quite right. And there are global keyboard shortcuts, which is something you and I have been talking about a lot lately, that allow you to jump straight from Menu Bar Stats into one of the system utilities on Big Sur so you can address any problems that you discover. In one of the most recent updates, there are 10 widgets in Notification Center that allow you to track all sorts of parameters that way as well. It works with M1 Macs too, and you can even back up your setup so that you have it for safekeeping and to migrate to another Mac when you buy a new one. The app is available on the Mac App Store, and I will put a link in the show notes so everybody can go check it out. We also did a giveaway of Menu Bar Stats on Club Mac Stories this week. Our thanks to Menu Bar Stats for their support of Unwind and Mac Stories. Okay, Federico, let's do our picks. I think we have a couple of video picks this week.
Yes, mine is a pretty simple pick. I'm picking For All Mankind Season 2. So this is the new season of one of the original Apple TV Plus shows. It picks up 10 years after the ending of Season 1. No spoilers in case you haven't watched it. For All Mankind, of course, it's the series that imagines, starts from a very simple sort of a butterfly effect kind of premise. What if, like this single change in human history, what if the Russians landed on the moon first? So the whole premise of the show is based on this single change in human history and everything that happens after that. The space race took a different path than what we know from history. And all I'm going to say, it's a very good show. And it starts out episode two, I still haven't watched. It came out overnight and I was sleeping. I love For All Mankind, but I'm not staying up until 6 a.m. to watch it. I mean,
yeah, that doesn't seem like a good idea.
I love it, but still, a man's got to sleep. And I'm loving it, right? I think the time jump works. I loved how in the first few minutes of episode 1 of season 2, there was a whole recap of certain historical events that happened like they actually did, but slightly differently from history. And I thought that was a very nice touch. Like, for example, again, without any major spoilers, John Lennon survived, right? So there was a shooting, but John Lennon survived. So all these things happened, but they went differently. And I don't know, this whole thing is something that resonates with me deeply, like the whole idea of what if a single change could cause this chain of reactions and other changes from what you know from history. And plus, the all the space shots and the base on the moon, it's just incredibly well shot. And so it's a fun, engaging show. I like it. I recommend it. Go, and if you haven't watched season 1, go watch season 1 right now.
Yeah, I love it too. I watched the first episode last weekend and really enjoyed it. It's really off to a good start. I think when I watched the season 1, it took me 2 or 3 episodes to really get into it, but this one grabbed me right out of the gate. All right, Federico, I have a story about not getting enough sleep too, related to my pick, which is Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry. And this is a documentary that came out. They were Apple TV Plus premiered it last night at 8 p.m. my time, and they coupled it with a live interview, a live performance and interview with Billie Eilish that Zane Lowe did. And that ran for about 45 minutes. And then they started showing the documentary. And it turns out the documentary is 2 hours and 20 minutes long. And I still had some work to do for MacStories last night. And so I didn't watch quite the whole thing. I watched the first hour and a half. And I feel like that was enough that's enough for me to recommend it, because the first hour and a half is terrific. And this is interesting because this is a documentary that was started before her most recent album came out, and it was started when she was still 16. I mean, this is, right at the beginning, the cusp of her career, before she, won all the Grammys and became world famous. And it's a great insight and look at what that turbulent time was like, where she was one of the fastest rising stars in the music industry, had a major album come out, toured the world. It's really fantastic, especially when you think about she was just 16 when this all started, right? And she's, I think, 19 now. But I think back to when I was 16, and I don't think I could have handled putting out a major record and touring the world, doing concerts and things at that age. And so it's about kind of what that part of her life was like. And there's some really interesting, I think, insights into how she makes music with her brother Phineas. A lot of footage of her working on that album in her brother's bedroom, which is where most of that album was created. And I find that aspect of watching people kind of make their, do their craft and make their art really fascinating. And so I highly recommend it. It is, arguably it's maybe a little too long. I think it's as long as it is because it does such a good job of both explaining what that time of her life was like, but also providing a lot of concert footage, which I think fans will really appreciate while she was on the road and stuff like that. But definitely worth, carving out the time and checking it out if you're a fan of her music. All right, Federico, that's it for this week on Unwind. We're going to wrap up this week, put a bow on it, and finish out strong. You can, of course, find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. Thanks to our sponsor this week. That is Menu Bar Stats. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram too, where I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next Friday, Federico.
Ciao, John.